because there are allegations that were made that perhaps there was sex trafficking going on, that she was kidnapped, even the potential that she was put in a piece of luggage and smuggled off the ship. My thing is, you're leaving the room at 5:30 in the morning or 6 a.m. Are we to think that you left barefoot? It would have to have been prearranged, which she didn't mention at all to her brother, like, oh, this guy made a pass at me and I turned him down, but now I'm going to go meet him at 5:30 in the morning? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
I discounted it right away, Bill.
Yep.
For a number of reasons, any one of which would make me suspicious, but there are multiple reasons here. I threw it away.
And he was polygraphed. We don't formally know the results of the polygraph, but let me say this, man. Polygraphs are so effed up. And I just know this from my experience at DEA. The pictures look like they may be Amy Bradley. Now, when I first saw that, and I saw, man, they're doing analysis, they think it's her. Wow, that's pretty impeccable. That's gotta be her. Where did that hit you? The Chief, Mark Garrett, how are you this morning? Yeah, I don't have that nice bumper that you have on your Leo Nation. Is that what that's called, a bumper? When the music?
I think, the bumper, the intro stuff.
And whenever I hear that on your show, it gets me motivated. You know, I get wound up.
Hey, we ought to have Anthony find you some good. He found that for me.
Right.
By the way, what I haven't done is put my phone on do not disturb. So I know you want
your
my
Android on do not disturb.
Yeah, whatever. See, we were having this discussion about Android and Apple, before we start recording, and even though Bill and Anthony over there staunch Apple people, I still love them, respect them, but I think they're screwed up.
Yeah, and I'm not even a staunch Apple person. I'm just, unfortunately, I'm in it now.
Yeah,
I can't get out. I'm in it so deep. It's just, I'm Apple forever. So
sounds like a cult to me.
Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah. Mark, the case of Amy Bradley. Now, you know that I am a fan of a good documentary.
Mm-hmm.
I love my Netflix documentaries. There's one on there now. It's been out, I think it came out in July.
Mm-hmm.
Amy Bradley is Missing, the story of the 1998 disappearance of Amy Bradley while on a cruise with her family. And most of the time when we talk about a documentary, I do say something to the effect of, hey, we're going to present, the documentary that I saw, I remind myself, shows generally one side of an issue. Most of the time, that's how a documentary is done. It kind of slants one way or the other. I feel like with this Amy Bradley show on Netflix, not the case. I think Ari Mark and Phil Lott, the creators, did an outstanding job of kind of showing all the different sides of it. And I don't know that I can sit here and say, like, hey, there's one particular not solution, what's the word? One particular disposition of the case, disposition of the disappearance that they're pushing. What theory is a better word? I can't really say that after watching it, they're pushing one specific theory and saying, this is what we think happened. I think they did a pretty good job of putting all the information out there and saying, hey, help us figure this out. What do you think? And there have been a couple things that have, people that have come forward or whatever, however you want to say that, since this documentary aired, but not really any real smoking guns since July when this came out. And I think that says something about the case also. So do you remember this one, Mark, when it happened back in 98?
You know what, vaguely. And I didn't remember her name. Absolutely not. But I remember the incident. It jogged my memory when I start watching the documentary. So I do remember it in general terms, but I didn't know the specifics until I watched the documentary.
I'm in the same boat. I remembered it from a long time ago. I don't even know, I couldn't have put my finger on when it happened, but I did remember this young woman disappearing on a cruise ship. And, how, whatever it's been now, 26, 27 years later, the family is still actively looking for her, believing, having hope that she's going to come home. What did you think about the overall presentation, Mark? Do you agree with me that it kind of was not slanted, or did you see some kind of slant in there where they were kind of pushing one
I
theory?
Yeah, I will say this. I agree with you in the sense that they weren't pushing a particular theory.
Hmm.
I, but I'll say that some of the information that they submitted, provided, some of the interviews, the footnotes, I don't think some of them, I don't think that some of them were necessary to include, other than from the piquing interest, curiosity point of view. So, was it slanted as far as conclusions? No, I wouldn't say that. But I would say that there was stuff put in there that to me was, in other words, I won't it was so unsupported as to its relevance. I don't think it was necessary. I think
Right.
this this extended the documentary from 2 to 3 episodes in short, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. You know what I noticed was statements made by maybe better to wait till we actually get to that point, but there were some statements made by some quote witnesses, right?
Hmm.
And I want to say that they didn't necessarily accurately reflect what that person had said at the time, because they did put up on the screen some written reports, briefly. And I was able to kind of stop pause the show and read sections of those reports. And, maybe I saw something a little different than what the person actually said in the interview, but we'll get into that as we get to it. So I don't know, Mark, I guess we'll go through it
Hmm.
chronologically and talk about Amy and what happened on the ship. And hopefully people will give us their opinions. Drop it in the comments. What do you think happened to her? Uh, there's strong opinions each way, and I'd love to see where people sit on this. The cruise. So I guess the family had won a cruise through work, some kind of contest where they worked or something to that effect. Mom and dad won it. They were able to take the kids with them. What's interesting, Mark, is they shared one cabin, not a suite, not a two-room suite or anything. This is one cabin with a bed, and then next to it, a pull-out bed, a sofa. What do you call that? Murphy bed back in the
Yeah,
day, Mark?
yeah. I think that'd be
And
good.
then, a little balcony with a sliding glass door, a balcony out where you could sit overlooking the water. Tight quarters.
Yeah.
So, not a lot's happening that you don't notice, you don't know about, etc. The cruise sets sail out of Puerto Rico March 21st of 98, and the itinerary was Aruba, Curacao, St. Martin, St. Thomas, and then I guess probably just a cruise back to Puerto Rico, a day or two on the water, going back to Puerto Rico. Day one, uneventful. They were in Aruba, uh, spent the day there. That night, there was a formal dinner on the ship, a dress up dinner, so to speak. And, the family immediately starts talking about how they felt that the wait staff paid an inordinate amount of attention to their daughter, Amy. By the way, I should say that Amy went on the cruise with mom and dad, and so did Brad Bradley, her brother, the son. Amy, I think, was 22 at the time, Mark. Does
I
that
think
sound
she
right?
was
23?
24, I believe.
Okay. Okay. And the brother, a little bit younger, let's
Yeah,
say 2
I think
years
two
younger,
years younger. Yeah.
something like that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, the family felt that the wait staff paid an inordinate amount of attention to Amy, and they even kind of joked like, "Hey, if you want something, tell Amy to ask for it because you'll probably get it quicker, et cetera, et cetera." I mean, is that one of those things that you were talking about? Like, why is it, what does that have to do with anything? Or is it, a young, attractive female? Of course, someone's going to pay more attention to her, or just the fact that there's a young person on a cruise.
Mhm.
Did that mean anything to you? Did that carry any weight with you? Or did you find that suspicious?
Well, I'll say this, Bill, as parents watching this, there's there's very little more nightmarish, I'm sure, that we can imagine than what these parents have gone and continue to go through 27 years later.
Yeah.
And so when you utilize hindsight, as these poor parents have, you certainly may be recalling things that are very concrete, very substantial, but you also may read into things. Now, again, I don't know. I don't have the answer as to what level of interest the cruise staff showed in Amy, or did or did not. So this is one of the areas where it's certainly left up to interpretation, and we have to understand there could be some bias in the memory, because just as I'd be examining every possibility, and I would be I'm talking about me, I might possibly be reading into things that are inconsequential. I don't know if that happened here, but I can't place a ton of weight on how much the staff was paying attention to Amy. The other thing is we have to remember that you're right. Younga trapped a girl, apparently single. I mean, when I say apparently single, apparently single, I'm sure to everyone on the ship and to the staff. She wasn't there with a partner of any sort. The job of that crew is to make as many people individually feel like they are the most important person in that ship as they possibly can. So the likelihood or the possibility that they were paying a lot of attention to Amy, they're probably paying a lot of attention to a lot of other people, especially those people who were outgoing and that were available to interact with.
That's a great point. I mean, that's what they get paid to do. You know what I mean? That's what they get paid to do, to make connections with people and make them build relationships and make them enjoy their experience on the ship. Dinner ended. They went back to the room, they changed clothes, and they went to the pool deck for a party that started at 10 p.m. And after the party at the pool deck, Amy and her brother went to the ship's disco, which I guess was at the very top of the ship. And the mom and dad went back to the room. I don't know exactly what time that was, but they stayed at the disco for quite some time, dancing, drinking. I think it came out later that Amy had 7 beers from, I don't know, I think they said 6 p.m. So maybe from when dinner started throughout the night. That was at least that she purchased 7
Right.
beers that she purchased, right?
Yep. I'm glad you
Yeah.
made that point. For that final
Right,
point.
because we don't know how, other people bought drinks for her or whatever the case. So Brad left the disco about a half hour before Amy did. And the way he explains it, she was up it was almost like a balcony within the disco. He makes eye contact with her and kind of motions that he's going to be outside, see you later, whatever, some kind of hand gesture, whatever. And he goes outside and he kind of hangs out there for a half hour while Amy remains inside in the disco. He goes back to his room where he arrives at 3:35 a.m. And how do we know this, right? Now, this is kind of a factual thing.
Right.
There aren't really too many hard facts in this case, which is one of the challenges for someone investigating this. But we know this through the locks on the door. When the guest presents their key card to unlock the door, a time signature is collected. So we know what time we know what time he entered the room. It was 3:35 a.m. Amy arrives back at the room just 5 minutes after him at 3:40 a.m. And she I guess they both went out in the balcony. And at some point, she tells him that she had been dancing and hanging out with the bass player of the band and that he had made a pass at her. So at some point then, they're out there. The brother comes in and he says he closes the sliding door completely. Right? Does it sound like I have all
Yep.
that right? And was there anything in there that caught your attention that I maybe missed about that sequence from she's dancing at the club with this guy, the bass player. At some point, he makes a pass at her. There's no kind of altercation, though. I mean, at least if there was, she doesn't describe it to her brother. They make it back to the room and they're outside kind of recapping what happened that night.
Yeah, I think you summarized it really well. Um, that's it. In other words, there's no indication that anything nefarious was underway at that point, um, based on the reported actions of the bassist and things like this. If I remember correctly, I'm not sure if it was just a matter of fact or if it was the reason that he did close the sliding glass door there. 'Cause if I remember correctly, they were both smoking on the balcony outside the room. Is that correct, Bill? If I remember
Correct.
correctly? Yeah, they were
Correct.
both smoking. And so I don't know if he didn't want the smoke to come back into the room or it was a little cool or whatever it was, but I just remember that they were both smoking. Actually, and they talk about that a little bit later during the investigation, if I remember correctly, the FBI.
Right.
But other than that, I think you summarized it perfectly.
So, almost nothing really out of the ordinary. I mean, hey, it did strike me that, she drank 7 beers.
At least
That's that would take a toll on me, at least at this point in my life, Mark.
I had 2 glasses of wine on Saturday night with the wife, and I forgot my name because I'm a teetotaler.
Right.
But look, going back and that having the 7 beers thing, and you saw me nod my head and said, that's what we know of that she consumed and things like that. That's a lot, even over a several hour time frame. And look, there are a lot of people who drink until they're vomiting. I get that, but that this is an important piece to me because
Mhm.
it certainly indicates the strong possibility of impairment, and I'll leave it there for further discussion later on.
Yeah, and I'll add something to that, Mark. And again, like just like you said, we'll hit on this later. But one of her friends later said the quote was, "She drank to cope. She drank to cope." So
Mhm.
we'll explain a little more about that later. But
Mhm.
um, so again, they're all in one cabin. Uh, at 5:30 in the morning, the dad wakes up and I guess he kind of looks over. He sees the son in bed, and he can see out on the balcony. He sees Amy's legs in a lounge chair, so he knows she's sitting out in the balcony. He goes back to sleep. And by the way, when her brother came in, it's a point in his statement that he closed the slide. When he came in, he closed the sliding door completely. Okay.
Mhm.
So dad's up at 5:30, sees the two kids, goes back to sleep, wakes up again at 6 o'clock, and this is where things go sideways. I guess is at 6 o'clock. Brad's still in bed. He doesn't see Amy's legs out on the deck anymore in the chair. She was gone. Now, at this time, the sliding door is open a little bit, 12 to 14 inches. Um, the yellow polo shirt she had worn the night before was draped on a chair. And my understanding is, and I tried to go back and kind of watch this a couple times to really understand exactly what they were saying about this, but the cigarettes were gone.
Mhm.
They did make a point of saying the cigarettes were gone. They couldn't find her cigarettes anywhere in the room or whatever. Um, so maybe Mark, let's talk about. So she's not there, right? And this is the disappearance. So let's talk about probably what we agree that didn't happen. I mean, because there are allegations that were made that perhaps there was sex trafficking going on, that she was kidnapped. Um, even the potential that she was put in a piece of luggage and smuggled off the ship. Do you and I agree, Mark, that she was not forcibly abducted from that room with her mother and father in bed, by the door, and her brother sleeping in the pull-out couch?
Yes.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
I
Like, go
I
ahead.
I agree that one of the disservices that the documentary does, do is when they're recreating the, environment there, if I remember correctly, Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe later on there were some FBI photos. I may have seen them online otherwise, or it may have been the documentary. But the general visual that the documentary is providing of that suite, it appears to be a lot larger in the documentary than it actually is in reality.
Hmm.
The FBI in the documentary, those agents made it very clear just how tight. If I remember correctly, they even talked about it was so tight that you kind of had to turn a little bit sideways to get through back and forth. So this goes to our agreement about how difficult it would be to have any level of commotion in there without waking up the entire family.
Yeah, it wouldn't have happened. It didn't happen. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm comfortable that didn't happen. So, you know, at this point in time, I think it's clear that one of two things happened. She went over the side of the ship off the balcony, or she voluntarily left the room. I mean, with what we've seen up to this point, really, it's only one of those two things. There could not
Agreed.
have been, there wasn't any kind of forcible um, abduction from the room. And yeah, I think we can get into a little more of that later about why I bring up that point and why it's significant, I think. So what do mom and dad do? Mom and dad are concerned, right? Because she was there at 5:30, she's gone at 6. They go see the ship's purser, or I don't know, kind of like an information desk, and they say that their daughter is missing. They ask for an announcement to be made, and I guess this is around 7 o'clock in the morning, and the ship is not willing to do that at 7 a.m. They
Mhm.
feel it would be disruptive to the other guests. They ask the parents to keep, look around for her and come back in 30 minutes or come back at 7:30 if you haven't seen her, if you haven't found her, and we'll do something at that time. The family asked that no one be allowed to get off the ship, and the cruise ship was, this was Royal Caribbean. The cruise ship was not, I guess, not down with that. They weren't going to restrict disembarking or whatever you call it. This was, from their side of it, thousands of guests. This is part of the promised thing. We don't know where this girl is. We don't, we can't just shut down operations because this girl left the room by herself or whatever happened. How do you feel about the ship's response in that first hour or so with, their kind of reluctance to put out a message right away, et cetera, et cetera?
Mhm. Well, I'll tell you this, and again, I'm sure this is, I guess, 27 years ago, so I'm sure this gentleman, by the way, it was the cruise director. You're
Okay.
talking about that guy. I'm sure he's no longer an employee of Royal Caribbean, but um, there probably could not have been a worse representative as far as I'm concerned. This guy was flippant at best, and I think disregarding, again, all these years later, the position the parents were in as far as he came across in that documentary. Now, having said that, he made some logical points. His delivery system was horrible, but I agree with the decision. I have to imagine, Bill, in a situation like this, where in the environment, that Amy Bradley is not the only person to have consumed 7 or 17 drinks or cocktails and ended up face down in some public restroom or someone else's cabin,
Hmm.
who's still vomiting, hasn't gotten up. It's not the first time. It probably wasn't the first time on that cruise that someone went, quote unquote, missing for a while. And unless there's something substantial to indicate there's nefarious activity happening, I don't blame the cruise ship for risking the convenience for how many guests they have on through 3,000, whatever it is, for the very, very, very unlikely possibility that someone really is missing. So I have to agree with the decision that at that point, the way they did it, to go ahead and continue business as usual. And there was a compromise that, a half an hour later, then they conducted a search from bow to stern and in every deck. So
Hmm.
that's my position on that.
I agree with you on that. I agree with you on that, Mark. And but I will say that the search, it was a strange search,
It
and
was.
they had a name for it. I forget what they called it, but
Yeah.
really, it was everyone is responsible for searching their own area.
Mhm.
every crewman is responsible for searching their own cabin, so to speak. And that's great if uh, like something is lost, like there's a lost article or even a lost person. But once you start, if there's a suspicion that there's some kind of nefarious action that took place, then having your staff search their own area doesn't really accomplish anything, because whoever was involved is not going to, self-admit they committed a crime or whatever. You see where I'm going with that?
Oh, 100%. Now, of course, that's making the assumption that it was a staff member that had committed a crime and not a fellow passenger as well.
Correct. And really, I mean, there was not really that much, really not, a very vague indication at that time that the only indication that any staff member was involved in the least at that time was she was dancing with the bass player from the
Douglas.
band, and she told her brother, "Hey, this guy made a pass at me." That's it. At this point, they talked to the police chief, and I don't know whether he was. And this was impactful for me, Mark. And this is one of those things a couple minutes ago where I said, "Hey, I want to see where you stand with this, because this is something that carried weight with me, and I don't know if it should have. Maybe I got kind of I don't know, coaxed into the delivery or something like that." The police chief was adamant. He said, "Man, I was born here. I grew up here. I know these waters. If a body went overboard, the body would have washed up." And he said, even if sharks attacked I shouldn't laugh at it, but he said, even if sharks attacked the body, an arm or a leg would have washed up.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of seat of the pants. Is he an oceanographer? I don't know, Mark. I don't think so. Is he tracking the currents? Does he have charts at his house where no, he's just kind of saying, "Hey, seat of the pants. I'm the expert. I grew up here. I know how the ocean works here." And did I put too much credibility or too much faith in his statement that I took it like gospel? Like, hey, if a body went over the side, it would have washed up.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, it was powerful for me as well. The reason it was powerful, Bill, is because he was one of the notable people in the documentary whom I felt was making a statement based on as much objectivity as possible. That he was saying, based on my experience, like you said, I grew up here. I've been in these waters. We've had people overboard. We've had bodies wash up. And now I'm probably putting words in his mouth. He didn't say those things, but based on his knowledge that he was convinced that there'd be some evidence. And again, this is based on the estimation of where she would have gone overboard. I said gone overboard, whether she fell or she jumped, that she left the ship. Based on the speed, the time of disappearance, things like this. So I believe that he was being sincere. And by the way, I also believe that there's a lot of credibility as far as science in what he was saying, even if he's not the scientist or, like I said, oceanographer. Let me give you an example. Look, here I am. I've had a boat for about 2 years. Now, my first boat, it's a pretty good sized boat. We take it out in the open ocean, out in the Gulf here. But more frequently, we stay there's a bay here, and the bay is let's just say about 25 miles long, and it averages probably about 4 or 5 miles wide, maybe a little bit longer than that. I think it was early this year sometime, a very experienced boater, for whatever reason, he went overboard off his boat by himself here in the bay, where we live very close to. And if I remember correctly, they didn't find, in other words, the boat's out there by himself. They needed gone overboard. I don't believe they found his body for 2 days. Now, this is in a bay,
Right.
Very enclosed. I think it averages about maybe 30 feet in depth. And they knew about where he went over clearly. And they didn't find his body for about 2 days. This is the open ocean. Is it 100% that you're going to find a body or evidence of a body, clothing, a body part? I don't think so. I don't think it's 100%. Is it very, very likely if all the things lined up as the investigator said about where she may have gone overboard? Yeah, I think it's probably very likely. But in that 10 or 15 or 20% chance that nothing ever shows up, like Amelia Earhart, different story, I get it. then what do you do? Does that prove she didn't go overboard because you have not been able to find evidence of it? I don't think so. I
Mm.
still think there's a fair window there, that she went over and she wasn't recovered and she wasn't found.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put that, Mark. I like how you said that. That just because she wasn't found doesn't mean that didn't happen. It just means she wasn't found. I have to tell you though, I did think back to Lacey Peterson when we
Mhm,
talked about that case, and
mhm.
that body was eventually found. Completely different circumstances. I get it, but that was a situation where the body was anchored with weights. And,
Mhm.
efforts were it seems like efforts were made to prevent that body from being found, and still something washed up on the shore up there in Northern California.
Well, it is interesting. You said it's a very different situation, and it
Yeah.
is. Now they were both in protected waters. They were both in bays. Or well, I shouldn't say both. In other words, Lacey Peterson body was. If Amy went overboard, I said I'm talking about the body here in Florida. I'm talking
Yeah.
about. So I'm conflating things. I apologize. But in Amy's case, in Amy Bradley's case, it was in open water.
Right.
It wasn't, as far as we know, unless this was a murder of some sort, it wasn't weighted down. And
Right.
you do have open currents and you do have a lot of wildlife, including sharks and barracudas and crabs and things like this. I'm talking about years down the road. So you're right. Even a long time afterwards, we found Lacey Peterson's body, but these are very, very different circumstances environmentally. And I just think when you talk about the open ocean, even when you're only a few miles or a little more than that was with the ship, I think the possibilities of her being in that water, never being found, are significant.
I do agree with that, man. I do agree with that. And I probably, when I first watched this, put too much faith or gave too much weight to what this police chief said. Almost like it was a fact, and it's certainly not a fact. The fact is the body wasn't recovered. That's what the fact is. That doesn't mean that it's not out there somewhere, it wasn't out there somewhere, etc. What about the scene, Mark? On the balcony of the ship, there was this little, I don't know what you would call it, like almost like a circular end table or small
Mhm.
coffee table. Um, it was pushed up against the railing, and her sandals were kind of placed together on the ground. I don't think they were on the table.
Mhm.
So I don't know whether were they intimating that maybe that table was used as a step stool to go over the side. Do you think that was like kind of what the intimation was there?
Well, yeah,
Okay.
whether whether they intended that or not, in other words, when they provided that information, I don't know, but it's certainly the conclusion that any reasonable person, I think, would consider. I wouldn't say jump to, but consider the possibility that she used as a step tool. By the way, I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, she may have been sitting there when Brad left and went inside, and maybe she pulled the table a little closer. She was sitting up against up against the hull of the ship there and pulled it closer for her to get her cigarettes. I really don't know why. By the way, I'm not even sure if the table was ever moved from the time Brad was out there, because again, we'll talk about more witness statements, but witness statements, he may not remember where the listen. I'm not sure where a chair is sitting on my lanai right now that I
Yeah.
used yesterday. So
Yeah.
all of this is very, very. It's not a lot of concrete evidence. All we know is that when the FBI got there, and according to the statements, the parents, things like that, the table had been moved. That we do know that.
Okay, let me bring something up here, which I don't know, it may be one of the more uh, impactful things that swayed my mind of this whole three three-part series, and it wasn't emphasized at all. The first part of it is the sandals. Sandals were there on the balcony, right?
Mhm.
So we talked about her leaving. If she left the cabin, she did it. If she didn't go over the side, Mark, is what I'm trying to say. She left the cabin on her own free will. She did not wear her sandals.
Mm.
If I jump ahead to the 45-second mark of episode 3, there was something that happened so quick, I almost missed it. I had to go back and freeze it. Do you remember when the mom took the videographer up in the attic of her house, and they went through and they said, these are the 2 bags that Amy packed and brought with her?
Mhm.
and basically she opened them up, and the contents, the stuff that Amy brought on the trip was still in those two duffel bags.
Mhm.
What was in there was a pair of white Nike sneakers. So my question is, she traveled with, and my wife and I got into a little bit of debate about this, and of course my wife was right, but she traveled with just two small bags, not very big, like two small kind of rectangular duffel bags.
Mhm.
We know she didn't wear the sandals if she left the room on her own accord. We know she didn't wear sneakers if she left the room on her own accord. My question is, what other footwear did she bring on the trip? I would have thought that maybe some more formal footwear, right? And, my thought is she didn't bring a lot of stuff. Probably 3 pairs of footwear is about it. Sandals, sneakers, and something um, a little more fashionable. So my thing is, you're leaving the room at 5:30 in the morning or 6 a.m. Are we to think that you left barefoot? And my answer to that's no. You right? I mean, do you disagree with that, Mark? I don't think if she
Bill,
left the room,
yeah, go
yeah, she's
ahead.
not leaving barefoot. So she didn't wear her sneakers. She didn't wear her sandals. What are you wearing at 5:30 or 6 in the morning to do whatever you're going to do? You're going to go meet someone, you have a prearranged meeting, or you're going to go buy cigarettes, or you're going to go ashore on your own. You're not going to wear any kind of formal footwear. I got to think you're going to wear probably sneakers or something that's more suitable for walking. And she did not do that. Now, my wife's counter to this is, when we travel, do you know how many pairs of shoes that she brings? No, of course not. Like,
Mhm.
but I am looking at, she did not pack too much, Mark. These two bags were kind of small. Um, I think, in fact, I would say about, two duffel bags that looked 18, 20 inches long.
Yeah, that's about right.
Not very big. So my question is to the family is, was there any footwear missing? And I feel like that is key to this case. We've established that no one came in the room and grabbed her against her will. And what I'm saying is, if she left that room on her own accord, you damn well can bet she had something on her feet. Was there any footwear missing? Because it seems to me unlikely that there was, from what I saw. Now, I'm making an assumption there, but it seems to me like that's something that wasn't talked about that could be a significant fact in the case. They knew that her blue jeans were there. They knew that the yellow polo shirt that she wore the night before was there. Why no mention of footwear? And my question is it because it's a fact that, the parents don't necessarily want to confront because it doesn't make sense that she'd leave the room barefoot?
Bill, I gotta tell you right now, and I certainly remember the sandals being, they said they're kind of askew, whatever,
Mhm.
in the investigation. What an excellent observation on your part, because I did not connect those dots. It is an excellent observation. Here's it. Now, while you're talking, while you educated me on that, you kind of maybe unintentionally educated me on another aspect of that. That's part one. You mean she went out barefoot at basically 6 in the morning with no footwear and then maybe exit the ship barefoot? But here's the other part, Bill, that you laid out so beautifully about these duffel bags and about the white sneakers that her mom says that, she packed, that was in there, things like that, and whatever other footwear that may have been in the bags, like you said, like your wife said, that we may not know about. Let's go back to how unlikely it was that she was abducted, because these tight quarters and everybody would have been woken up. Do we really think she'd be able to go back into that room and dig through a duffel bag and find some footwear and put it on? Her dad had just been awake and saw her just a few minutes earlier by his own statement, but he would have slept through her rambling through a bag and putting shoes on. I doubt it. It's a great observation, Bill.
Yeah.
It really is. On
Yeah.
your
And
part.
that's a great point too. Like, anything you do in this room is gonna wake people up. Um, excuse me, Mark. So let's talk a little bit about, like, some of the witnesses and some of the other people on the cruise that had something to say. The first, and man, they're all kind of, I don't know the way to describe it, interesting characters, I would say, Mark. The
Yeah.
neighbor on the other side or I guess not on the other side, the neighbor that had the cabin next to them. His
Mhm.
name was Brightag, cruising by himself, solo cruiser. Now, the neighbors on the other side of him said that in the morning he had the TV on very loud, yet they heard him talking over the TV. And, that struck them as unusual. So the thought was like, who is he talking to if he's there by himself? And why is the TV, so loud? Was it to cover up something that was going on, et cetera, et cetera? Mean anything to you? Did you even catch that? Was significant part for me? Not really. Who
N
knows? Guy,
Not
you're on
really,
a
listen.
cruise, you're drinking or whatever.
Right.
Maybe he can't. He's like me. He's half deaf. He needs the TV loud. I don't know.
Yeah, b by the way, my wife would say the same thing about me. So,
Yeah,
in other words, is it kind of like a, well, possibility, interesting point? Yeah, but is it significant? No, not to me.
yeah.
No.
Um, One thing that was significant. So there was a company that had several people from their company on this cruise, and there was a videographer that was on the cruise, and I guess he had kind of professional video equipment, and he was filming uh, the people from the company. So when he heard what happened, he starts looking back through his. They put out flyers, this woman's missing, etc. He gets a picture of her. He goes back through all his videos, and he had been filming in the disco the night before, and he sees Amy dancing with the bass player of the band, a guy with the nickname Yellow.
Mhm.
So that kind of corroborates what she told her brother, at least the first part of it, that she was dancing in the nightclub with this guy. Um, he talks about how somebody demanded his masters, like his master tapes, and he wasn't about to give them up. He just made a copy of anything that had Amy on it and provided it to the FBI. But at least from my point of view, Mark, there's nothing on any of the videos that he recorded that they showed that really answers any questions. The only thing it does is corroborate that she was dancing with this one member of the crew. Is that how you took that? Was there more to that?
Now, nothing more. I'll tell you what is, well, what my question was is what other things were on those videotapes that we don't know about? In other words, how many other women did he dance with?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you saw him dancing with 2 or 3 other women throughout the course of this evening, it would put a lot less weight on the fact that he was dancing with Amy. It would just say, "Hey, this is what I do." And by the way, not only am I doing it for the cruise ship, maybe he did have personal motives to hook up with somebody on the ship. But we don't know what was excluded from those videotapes as far as what our eyes saw.
Yeah. Yeah. So now a couple young women eyewitnesses, and this is the challenging one because it goes to, establishing that chronology, that timeline of who was where and when things happened. And it's hard to do. It was hard to do in this case, but there was two young women who had seen Amy at the club, and they went back to their rooms, but I guess then they said they couldn't sleep or whatever. They wanted to go back out on the deck. Then they went back out on the deck, and they said sometime between 5 and 6 a.m., they saw this guy, Yellow, and Amy going up the glass elevator to the nightclub, even though the nightclub was closed. And a short time after that, they see Yellow walk past them, and they said that he didn't speak to them. He walked right by. Now, so in order for this to be accurate, first of all, I gotta say, like, here's what would have had to have happened. We know Amy went to the room at 3:35, right?
Mhm.
We know from this guy Yellow, his name was Alistair. I don't. His
Is
last
it
name is escaping
Doug?
me right now.
I think Douglas.
Alistair Douglas.
Yeah.
We know from Alistair Douglas's cabin lock that he arrived at his room. Uh, I'm sorry. We know Amy arrived at the room at 3:40 a.m. 3:40 a.m. to her room. Um, Alistair Douglas arrived at his room at 3:35 a.m. So, and he clocked in his room. He key carded in his room. So here's what would have had to have happened for this to be accurate. Amy would have had to have been, she's dancing with this guy. He makes a pass at her. They go their separate ways. She gets back to the room. It's on her mind enough to tell her brother about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you would have to believe that she left the room and that Alistair Douglas left his room at about the same time. And they both met up at some place on the ship. It would have to have been prearranged, which she didn't mention at all to her brother. Like, oh, this guy made a pass at me and I turned him down, but now I'm going to go meet him at 5:30 in the morning. Like,
Right.
that doesn't make any sense, Mark. So this
No.
timeline to me makes no sense that they would. Facts show that they were both in their room at 3:35, 3:40 in the morning. But now we're to believe that they both left their rooms and somehow, without the use of cell phones back in 1998 on a cruise ship, somehow they left their rooms and met up and were seen going up this elevator. I just don't think that timeline is accurate.
No, I don't think it's not credible.
Right. It's not credible.
And the other reason, and go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
The other reason, we're going to get into this, I won't drop this bomb right now, but the other reason is that we have to question what would be Amy's motivation for meeting this guy voluntarily. And we'll talk about that unlikelihood here, I'm sure, in a little bit.
Yeah. And that's my point, right? That is a great point. Like, what is her motivation to have something that almost, hey, this is a big cruise ship, to have something that almost had to be a prearranged meeting with this guy? You're going to leave your room and he's going to leave his room and you're going to meet up somewhere and go back up to the disco at 5 or 6 in the morning. Now, two things additional about this, Mark. When there were two women who were the supposed witnesses that saw this, okay? If they did show their written statement on the screen at one point, and you have to freeze it to read the statement, I think it's at the beginning of episode 3, don't quote me on that. But what was said in the witness statement, now, I guess the way for me to say this is one of the girls, when they saw Alistair or Yellow going up the elevator with Amy, then they saw him a short time later walking by himself down the deck. The girl who spoke on camera, I think, said, he didn't talk to us. I thought it was strange because he had been trying to talk to us in the club, etc. But when you read the written report that they put up on the screen in episode 3, the other girl that was with her said, I talked to him. He seemed normal. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but my friend didn't talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he came by, and at least one of those two girls, according to the written report or statement that she made at the time, spoke with him. Here's what I think, Mark. I think that their time frame is off by 2 hours. And I don't know whether, hey, they're on vacation. Did they not switch their watches to whatever time zone that is in the Caribbean, Eastern time or whatever? But if you were to tell me that between 3 and 4 a.m. they saw this, I would say 100%. It happened at about 3:30. Amy rode up the elevator with this guy. He made a pass at her. She said no. They went their separate ways. She gets back to her room at 3:40. He gets back to his room at 3:35, and the night's over, and that's where it ends. And in looking at the facts that we know and kind of mixing in some of that supposition, I mean, that's what I think happened. The timeline there is not credible. And by the way, these women, we don't know what these two girls, we don't know the timeline any better because they didn't have the key to their room.
Right.
So when they got, after this interaction with Yellow, they went back to their room. They had to knock on the door and their mother let them in. So there's no hard timestamp. And the FBI actually never interviewed the mother to try to corroborate that or get that timeline ironed out. Not that that really would have helped, because I'm sure the three of them are talking, and probably the story would be the same. And just because it's the same doesn't mean it's accurate. But to me, I had to kind of discount this information because this was just, I don't doubt that it was Yellow or Alistair Douglas. I don't doubt that it was Amy Bradley. I doubt the time. I don't think it's correct. I think it was 2 hours earlier.
Well, Bill, it's another great observation on your part about, and this is what I was waiting to get to, was the key card issue. I have to be honest with you. I am a little suspicious that any of this happened, Bill. I'm a little suspicious about their observations for a couple of reasons. The main reason is that times two, there was no key card. In other words, they both forgot to take their key card, knowing that that's the only way they can get in other than waking mom up.
Mm-hmm.
So what is their motivation for, making up a story that they passed in the hallway, whatever? I'm not sure, but you made a great point. One says, in short, he ignored us. The other one says that we had a brief whatever hi greeting, blah, blah, whatever. And I guess the women are in close proximity to one another.
Yep.
So either you have a classic case of two witnesses experiencing the same thing but having very divergent recollections, or you have a case where they both decided to make it up and it's very convenient. They know that the key card probably is going to give a record of when they entered the room, and there's no key card entry. Mom had to open it, and then the FBI doesn't interview the mom. There are so many holes in the story. I discounted it right away, Bill.
Yep.
For by the way, for a number of reasons, any one of which would make me suspicious, but there are multiple reasons here. I threw it away.
Yeah, I did too. It's just not credible. Let's mention that Yellow, Alistair Douglas, was questioned by the FBI, and he was polygraphed. We don't know the results. We don't formally know the results of the polygraph, but let me say this, man. Polygraphs are so effed up. And I just know this from my experience at DEA.
Pardon me.
They're not admissible in court, first of all. We everyone knows that by this point, but we used to use them in the hiring process. And man, the amount of times that I just saw stupid stuff happen, and it was more the person administering the polygraph. Like there would almost be like a percentage that they had, like, hey, this person is 60% passes, 30% fails, and whatever the 10% undetermined or countermeasures or whatever, and that percentage follows them. And you bring someone else in to do the same polygraph, they're going to get a different result. Anyway, I guess my point in talking in circles about that is, man, it doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't mean anything. Usually a polygraph, just so people understand, usually a polygraph is used as a tool because during the exam, they're going to do the exam, then they're going to come back and say, hey, you lied. Whether they think you lied or not, they're going to come back and say you lied and try to extract more facts out of you, thinking that you didn't tell the whole story and now you're going to come clean, etc. Don't pay any attention. Anything else about that, Mark, about the polygraph? Or
I agree. And the same thing with background checks. You're talking about the Highway Patrol. And again, I've been gone for a while now, but as far as I know, they don't use polygraphs for background checks for applicants, things like that. I'll say used again, so I can be accurate in case they're not using anymore. But I know at one time they only used it was called a voice stress analysis. And because a lot of researchers, whatever professionals think that's more accurate than polygraphs, and just for the reasons that you laid out there. The other thing too, I think anybody watching this, Bill, is the fact the FBI did not make a big point of the polygraph results in the documentary. They talked about it. It was just kind of glossed over. We should gloss over it too.
Yep. So the family flies home from St. Thomas. They don't, after St. Thomas, they don't continue on with the cruise back to Puerto Rico. They fly home, and then this is when, the cruise is over, right? So the family's back home and kind of setting up a command center, trying to get leads developed. And this is when kind of the first post-cruise eyewitness comes forward. His name is David Carmichael, and he goes on vacation with a friend to a place called Porto Marie, Curacao, a place where there's incredible diving, I guess, scuba diving. And he sees, and this is August of 98, so I don't know, what's that, 6 months or a few months? Yeah, a few months after the event, sees a woman walking on the beach with two men. He says, and I don't, I'll just say what he says. She's attractive, she's tan, and she's a smoker. I don't know how he would know she's a smoker unless she's actually smoking, but that's fine. He says she has a tattoo of the Tasmanian devil, which Amy did have on her shoulder or on her back, a tattoo of a Tasmanian devil with a basketball. And he says the woman walked up to her as if she was going to say something. And then one of the men she was with kind of motioned for her to move away or something. And one of the guys stared at Carmichael. And he said, had that guy not stared at him, he would have probably forgotten the whole thing. And what caused him to remember it was my favorite show, Mark, America's Most Wanted.
Yeah.
At that time in 98, they did a story on Amy Bradley on the cruise, and he saw her and said, "That's the woman that was on the beach that I saw with the two men." And he identified Alistair Douglas, Yellow, the bass player from the band, as one of the two guys that was with her. Now, before, Mark, I want to ask you about uh, identifications, you know what I mean? Or eyewitness testimony. Like, how reliable do you think eyewitness testimony is? Because I've heard different things in the past 10 years about it. But first thing I want to say is kind of basic investigatory steps. Like, this shouldn't be open-ended as it was left in the documentary.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, I know that Alistair Douglas worked for the cruise line for another 2 years after this event. So they know, was he on a ship that was in Curacao in August of 1998, or was he on vacation, or can they? That's something that can be proven one way or the other. If he was in Puerto Rico on that day in 1998, playing the bass on a cruise ship, it wasn't him. So it should not have been left open-ended like that. Like, the FBI could close this one out. This one isn't something that should have been dangling on like that. But as far as eyewitness testimony, Mark, where is that going in today's society, and how accurate is that today?
Well, Bill, I can't help but follow up on what you said about this open-ended aspect of the documentary with or investigation. He was either there, he wasn't. Now, I guess there's a possibility the guy's on 3 weeks vacation. He's not working the cruise ship, and the cruise ship company has no idea where he is. Well, then say that, in the documentary. Let us know. I don't know. As far as eyewitnesses, where it is today, again, I'm not in the profession anymore, and I can speak, anecdotally about this, as investigating literally thousands of primarily traffic accidents, which is, by the way, is a great barometer for eyewitness statements. It really, really is. But also a lot of crimes I investigated. And there's two things that you're looking for. It's credibility and it's accuracy based on corroborating evidence that you may have. That's what you're looking for. Because credibility, by the way, is something that it can be fairly well proven pretty quickly, or sometimes so, but often it can. In other words, yeah, I saw this at blah, blah, blah time. And you already know. In other words, there was a clock in the background with a photo in it saying it's 12 o'clock. And the person says, yeah, I saw this at 10:45. The thanks, we'll call you later on. They weren't there. They're just lying to you, you're making up. So credibility is gone. But the other thing is, as far as witnesses, is if the timeline is so important, all of the witness statements here, they have to come into question because of programs like America's Most Wanted, the immediate publicity after this. There's a ton of information that either law enforcement is putting out there or the family is putting out there. There's a ton of information. Now the witnesses can go back and say, oh yeah, I knew about this. I knew about the Tasmanian double tattoo, or I didn't know about it. I happened to see it at that time, but of course they already knew about it. So it's not saying it's not true, but it's very, very difficult at that point to discern about what is someone just lying about because they've seen it on television, or what did they actually honestly see and it happens to be publicized. It makes it very difficult. If you have a case, and this is why it's so important often when you're conducting an investigation in law enforcement, you want to gather as much information as possible before you publicize anything. Because if you get a phone call, one of these tips, a day later, and someone calls you up and they supply 2 or 3 relevant pieces of information that line up with evidence you have that has not been publicized, this is a credible witness. But the day you put out, this guy is 6 feet tall, he's this race, he was wearing this hat, and the next day you get 500 tips saying, hey, I saw a 6-foot guy this race with his hat on, it's almost meaningless. So that's where we are here. That's why I felt about this. But your point about the cruise line being able to tell us where, what this guy's footprints were, and we didn't know about that in documentary. It's an excellent, excellent point. Like I'm the one going around and around here. The bottom line is the witness statements, they are only as reliable as far as you can cooperate them with other evidence, whether that's before or after the fact. In other words, someone says, hey, listen, by the way, officer, detective, I saw this happen yesterday, blah, 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 blah. They may not even know a crime had been committed. But I saw this person who was really, really suspicious in front of this house for a couple of hours, parked there, back and forth, blah, blah, blah. They may not even know that later on that evening, a crime, a murder, or rape, or robbery was committed there, but they come forward and just FYI, that's strong, strong, powerful witness statement. That is very, very, very reliable information. Here we have just the opposite.
A great point on corroboration, right? It's a great way you said that, because there were facts here that could have been corroborated. Like if let's say if that cruise ship was in Curacao and Yellow was working on that cruise and it was in Curacao on that day when this guy was on vacation, then you say, wow, that's corroborates kind of what he was saying. This person was there. He could have very well been on the beach, etc. But we didn't have that. So, and that's something that can be proven or disproven. I think if it's not Alistair Douglas, which I don't think it was, then the whole story kind of gets tossed out the window. The second witness that comes up, and Mark, don't forget, at this time now, there's a $260,000 reward. Was also in the summer of '98, a taxi driver came forward and says that he saw Amy Bradley on the island. She was wearing a white top and blue jeans. Again, I think her clothing had already been published, just like you said. And she asked where she could use a telephone. And he pointed out where a telephone was. And then she walked the opposite direction, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Right.
Yeah. 100%.
So, yeah, I mean, I put no credibility in this statement at all.
Zero.
Yep. So at one point, the family went back down there for a press conference, and they did drive around with a police chief and look at these places. And this is where it got a little hokey, where they thought they heard Amy calling out to them, and they would see an empty pack of Tic Tacs and say, "Man, I wonder if she was here because she liked Tic Tacs." Something that probably has to be mentioned, and it's kind of you brought up the way the cruise director. Some of the things he said may be factually accurate, but his delivery sucked. I agree with that 100%. The family does want to keep hope alive, and they are trying to grasp things and hold things close that continue to keep hope alive for them, that their daughter's okay, or at least alive somewhere. And I think a lot of that is what we saw here. I think a couple more witnesses, or at least one, Mark. This one, an interesting one, because the guy's been around. Bill Hefner,
no
the
doubt.
Navy veteran, 18 years.
Brandy, you're a fine girl. What a fine, good wife. Yeah, this one got me. Yeah,
and he actually, I was wondering where the story was going, and then when I heard him say one thing, I'm like, yeah, this guy's no dummy. He actually probably correctly identified what was happening with the situation. Here's what the situation is. He's on the USS Chandler in January 1999, pulls into Curacao. People may realize, may not realize, and we had this at DEA in foreign countries, Mark. There's places that are off limits that you're not allowed to go to. And, there were places that when this naval ship pulls in, there's places that are off limits that the sailors, they're allowed to disembark, but they're not allowed to go to certain places. Bill Hefner went to a place he was not supposed to go to. And in this place he was not supposed to go to, which appeared to be kind of a bar connected with maybe like a hotel, hourly rate hotel above it or something to that effect, likely prostitution going on. He says that he went in there and, there's a guy with a 38 at the door who questions him, and he says, "Oh, I'm just going to have a beer." And then, okay, go ahead. And he sees two guys and two girls walk in from upstairs. The two girls sit at a table, and one of the two girls walks away to the bar or something. And the remaining girl tells him she's being held against her will, right? Mm-hmm. And she says, "I owe $200. I need $200 to get my freedom. And she said her name was Amy Bradley. And she got off. The story she told was that she got off the cruise ship on her own accord and went to buy drugs in the town and kind of got trapped there. So the sailor, and then, like I said, I was kind of waiting to see where the story was going to go. I think he correctly identified what was happening. He's like, "Hey, I've been to the Philippines, I've been to Thailand, I've been all over. This sounded like a scam to extort money from me. They're trying to get a couple $100 from me. This is a story they came up with, et cetera, et cetera." But he didn't report it at the time, but he reported it when he was out of the Navy, I think sometime around 2001, after he saw it on TV or something. I don't know if he saw it on Dr. Phil or some other show. He reported it and came forward with the story. But to me, it sounds like this is, I believe his story 100%, Mark. I think he's being honest about, what he was doing there, who he interacted with, what they said, etc. I just don't think that was Amy Bradley. I think that was, some enterprising women of the night coming up with a scam to get a couple $100 off of a sailor who's by himself at a place he's not supposed to be.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you to this extent, Bill. The story is quite likely the scenario that he presented, with a little caveat. I don't know if a few years later that he'd remember what name she gave.
Mhm.
Maybe if he were aware of what was happening, if he'd seen the publicity, this woman's missing, and a year later, basically, it was, I think, she says, "I'm Amy Bradley." Maybe he did remember. I don't know if he remembered that detail. He says he had one beer, buying one beer. He probably had 4 at that time. Again, how it goes. But yeah, I agree with you that the story basically is probably accurate, and it probably was a scam. If she did say Amy Bradley or gave any name whatsoever, it wasn't her.
Yeah. Mark, a couple, and then, a while ago, I talked about how the staff on the ship was very attentive to Amy. And there were a couple other things that the parents brought up as happening on the ship that I wonder if they caused you to lean one way or the other. The one was, as the cruise ships have like a staff photographer, and
Mm-hmm.
they take pictures, and those pictures are available for sale. You kind of go to the gift shop and you pick out your picture. Interestingly, according to the family, the pictures of Amy were missing from the gift shop. They were not there. And the question was, or the thought of the family seemed like was, "Hey, mate, somebody bought those pictures or took those pictures because they were infatuated with Amy, and that person may have had something to do with her disappearance." And they bring up that the photographer seemed adamant, "Oh, they're right here, they're behind these," and, "Oh no, I know I put them out here," et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Any impact with you, that little snippet story, did that have any impact with you other than kind of a curious point?
Yeah, it's a curious point, and I have to admit I remember that, but I believe there was some alternative explanation in the documentary about what happened to those pictures. And maybe I'm wrong on this, Bill. Maybe I'll jog your memory if you can help me out here. But I thought there was a counter to that as well about someone else that I can't remember now. So
Yeah.
I don't want to give erroneous information, but the fact that they couldn't find those pictures, they claimed they couldn't find those pictures, maybe they couldn't. It just it doesn't tell me much of anything. Maybe someone did buy them. Maybe I have no idea. But um, along those lines, I don't know if you're going to get to this or not, but one of the things that I kept waiting for, and again, I know this is 1998. It's a little different today,
Hmm.
but even in 1998, especially on cruise ships, hotels, stadiums, cameras
Hmm.
were ubiquitous. Security cameras. We didn't see much of that in this documentary about
No.
foot traffic. But we
No, and they
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
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 I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, and they did mention that there were cameras, but only in some of the common areas, and they glossed over it like they didn't see anything.
Big time.
Right.
And they really did gloss over it, but only the common areas. Now, again, I could be wrong. If someone worked on a cruise ship, maybe for this company or another one in 1998, maybe you can put in the comments that, yeah, you know what, they really were only in the common areas. They weren't in hallways, things like this. But I'm telling you right now, as and with the, you know, the gangplank when you're embarking, disembarking, things like that. I would have to think that the level of security, and using security cameras there, I think it would have to be pretty robust. And in other words, we could have a pretty good process of elimination here, saying we didn't see her go off the ship, and we didn't see a steamer trunk being rolled off the ship with her, possible body in it. They really didn't go deep into that, and that bothers me.
That's a great point. And also the FBI, at least in the portions that we saw, didn't even talk about that. It was really, the video was just really glossed over, like, but again, because it didn't show anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's not really showing anything. Uh, they don't add it in there. I guess, Mark, something that was really impactful to me when I saw it, and then I started thinking back to some of the things you and I have talked about in the past, was the photos from the website. So the family sets up this email address, I guess, for tips, etc., and they are sent photos from, I think it was like adultonlyvacations.com or something to that effect, like a sex trafficking or prostitution based vacation travel website. And the pictures look like they may be Amy Bradley. Now, 1998, even Photoshop is not, well, actually, this would have been after 98. I don't know when
Yeah.
it was, probably early 2000s, I guess.
Yeah, I believe it was.
Yeah, so I mean, Photoshop is out there, etc. Yeah, you can do some things, certainly nowhere near the AI we have today. But the FBI does a, quote, forensic analysis of Amy Bradley photos and these photos on the website, and they determine that they think it is her. What now? When I first saw that, and I saw, man, they're doing analysis, they think it's her. Wow, that's pretty impactful. That's got to be her. Where did that hit you?
Here's where it hit me. I thought, oh boy, we're onto something here. I mean, in other words, when you first saw it, and they said it's likely her, and then it fell off a cliff. There was no follow up on it. It just said it was likely her, and you would think that they, at this point, they would bring in an analyst, an expert, and explain why. Here's the measurements of the nose, the ear, the chin, things like this, to really dive deep into it and tell you why. But again, they just kind of left it alone. Plus, there was no follow up about the geographical aspect. Okay, where were the photos taken, and did we send investigators there? Did we gather new witness statements? Was there anything forensic? So it just kind of left an open question, or question for me. That's redundant. Just left the question about the accuracy or the validity of the claim that these photos match Amy Bradley.
Yeah, and I thought back, Mark, to the things you and I have spoken about with why am I drawing a blank on what it's called? We did that one show on photo.
Oh,
recognition.
the surveillance.
Yeah. What's the technical term for that, though?
Yeah, I had the same problem. We'll probably come back to it as we talk about
right.
it.
So anyway, like, using today, using computers to facial identification.
Thank you. Yeah,
using facial identification algorithms, facial recognition software to to do things like this, to match up pictures or identify suspects from a picture. And even with today's robust AI algorithms, the computer's getting it wrong oftentimes. Right?
Correct.
So, the fact that the FBI did measurements from a very limited number of pictures, and they say it's not them. I mean, they say it's her, likely her, I don't remember exactly what the wording was. As I kind of thought about it more and looked into it more, that doesn't have the credibility that one might think it would carry with me, just because I'm aware of, not to bash on the FBI, Mark, but this impacted several big cases that I worked on at DEA. There was a scandal at the FBI around this time, late 90s, of FBI forensic experts testifying outside the scope of science, saying things that could not be scientifically backed up. And as a result, it was during the time Obama was president, because I remember Eric Holder was the AG. So what was that, 2008
The, yeah,
2008 to
to
16.
16. Yeah.
Tens, if not hundreds, of cases were reviewed, and the government agreed not to contest if the defendant asked for a new trial because of oftentimes, the FBI kind of stating things that couldn't be scientifically backed up. So, in saying all that, I don't put a lot of credibility in this photo identification. Does it look similar to her? Yeah, it does. I mean, I'll say it does, but I don't know enough about that science to say that, like, hey, your ears never change, or the distance between this point and this point, or your widow's peak never changes. Some of the things that supposedly make these things the same. A, a couple more things, Mark. The one more, I think the one more eyewitness I want to talk about is a woman named Judy Maurer, and she was the one that was on vacation in Barbados, and she had the interaction in the restaurant. You remember that one?
Yes.
So she's with her husband. They're walking the streets of Bridgetown, Barbados, and they decide to go back to the ship. She's gonna use a restroom real quick. She goes in a restroom into a stall, and then people come in the restroom, and there's male voices, female voices. I don't know. I'm trying to see if I have notes. She hears the guy say, "The deal is at 11, and you have to be ready to go." Um, I guess the men or man then left the restroom, and she comes out of the stall and speaks with this woman who was there. The woman identifies herself as Amy from, Judy Maurer thinks she said West Virginia, and she seemed sure that it was Amy Bradley. And now later on, she also says she heard them say to her, "You promise you're not going to try to leave." And then she says, the woman who she's sure is Amy says, "Can we see the children?" "Yes, we can, if you promise not to try to leave." And then there's talk about, Stockholm syndrome, and is Patty Hearst with her captors. And now all of a sudden she has kids, and she's doing this so they don't harm the kids. I don't know. This eyewitness seemed a little bit just all over the place with kind of a crazy story. Like, she didn't remember exactly what was said, but it fits this kind of narrative.
Yeah. And there are so many aspects of the story. Like you said, Bill, you laid it out here. You have the drug aspect, you have the captive aspect, you have the children aspect. There's so many things going on here. And then when I look at this witness statement, I don't look at it by itself. You have to compare it to the other supposed witness. There's another time where she's working as a prostitute, right? There's another time that she's out on the beach with her alleged kidnapper, Yellow, and all these things. So they're all very divergent, and so nothing lines up. And then this goes back to witness statements. If you had witnesses from different backgrounds, different time frames, things like this, and all their statements were, "Yeah, I saw her at this location, and I saw her doing this, and these are things that she said." If you have these people that were otherwise unrelated, that hadn't spoken to each other, and they keep focusing in on the same characteristics, the same time frames, the same locations, the same conversations, the same observations over and over and over, it would give a lot of credibility. But all of these witnesses are all over the place. So I give it, zero credibility.
Yeah. A couple more things, Mark. I mean, that's really it for the witnesses. I think the two things that we haven't touched on yet are her sexuality and her kind of mental state. She had come out as a lesbian. She was involved with a woman and named Molly McClure. And just prior to going on this cruise, there was let's call it a rocky point in a relationship, right? Amy had been with another woman and confessed this to Molly.
And there was a Dear Jane letter.
Yeah, and then Molly had blown her off. I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, Molly had blown off Amy, was not answering her phone calls. Amy.
No. It was Amy, I believe.
No. Amy had been calling. Amy called her and confessed what she did. And
Correct.
Molly said,
yes.
"Hey, I need some
time." At that point,
right?
Yes.
Yeah, I need
right.
some time.
Right.
So she stopped answering phone calls. Amy started writing letters. She stopped, or she didn't answer any letters. And then the message in a bottle, which I thought was pretty, I don't know, there is some symbolism in that, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So Molly receives this message in a bottle, you know, and in this letter, she tells Molly that she didn't like the person that she was. I don't know if it was past tense or she didn't like the person she had become. She didn't like some of the things that she did. And in the closing letter, the closing line of the letter is, "Please save me." Now, when I first saw this, I thought, man, that sounds like someone who's kind of struggling with some mental health issues, and they're not doing well, and you know, almost sounds like suicide could have been something that they. I guess I should probably even be careful saying that word here, huh?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Harming oneself.
harming oneself might have been something on her mind. But they did, according to Molly, patch up the relationship before they went on a cruise. Molly even received a postcard from her on a cruise. But this is where one of the friends, and I unfortunately don't remember which one though, Mark, made the statement that I alluded to earlier, where they said, "Hey, she used alcohol to cope." You know, today we would probably call that self-medication, right? She drank to self-medicate for whatever was going on in her head. Uh, what do you think about her mental state? And it's hard. Listen, I get it. I Mark, I've seen suicides. You know, when in the workplace, I've had people that work for me, unfortunately, commit suicide, and it's never something that is easy for parents to accept. It just does. It's something that by definition and in its essence, it doesn't make sense. It's never going to make sense, right? For someone to take their own life. Where are you at on mental health struggles she might have been going through, or just on her mental well-being and happiness in life at this point?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult reality. And again, according to Molly, we have to accept the time. We have to, if we accept the time frame here with the message in the bottle, um, it really couldn't be more really indicative of where what her mind state of mind was. I'm talking about Amy. And look, unfortunately, I've been well acquainted with more than a couple of people who've taken their life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest with you, at least one of those people, it didn't come as a terrible shock. It didn't. And by the way, it was this person was actually, had been in therapy, things like this. So it wasn't like, oh, how come you didn't intervene? How come somebody didn't step up? People had and try to help. But there are other people that I've known that have taken their life that it was, I'd say, pretty shocking. I can't believe it. And so here we have a piece of physical evidence. We have a letter that was written to a romantic interest. Um, and there was, apparently some hurt going back, initial hurt towards Molly. And then Molly said, "I'm going to cut you off here because I'm so hurt." Um, and then we have another witness saying that, she would cope with alcohol and maybe some other substances, but certainly alcohol. And then very shortly later, this incident happens on the boat. We don't know. There's no proof. There's nothing definitive about what happened. But I will say this: it's as likely as any other scenario that we've examined today, Bill, that this was a self-inflicted act at this point. And really based on her apparent state of mind. And the fact that I keep going back to it, this particular night, we know factually that she consumed at least 7 beers. I'm telling you right now, I am telling you right now, based on experience, and that's what someone consumed. She probably had 12 or 14 drinks, probably. And then we know her proximity to, whatever, in the boat, to the water, things like this. And then you go through the process of elimination. What other possibilities? We really haven't been able to grasp onto anything with any certainty. So the state of mind is a big, big issue here. It's a big indicator of what may have happened.
Yeah, and alcohol does exacerbate those state of mind issues. I mean, I saw that with one suicide of someone that worked for me. People said they didn't see it coming, whatever, but it was after a night of drinking.
Mm-hmm.
It went home after a night of drinking and took his own life.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously very different situation, but still, alcohol exacerbates those feelings, and that's something, like you said, that has to look at. The final thing, Mark, and this is something that carried a lot of impact with my documentary viewing partner, my better half, Mark. She felt this was impactful, and this caused her to form her view of what happened. So this is the David Carmichael, a telecommunications engineer who teams up with the gentleman who has the website amybradleyismissing.com. And they start mining this website, data mining the website. And you and I have talked about some of these things over the past year, 2 years. What they're doing is they're logging all the IP hits. So they're logging who goes on to this website, and they're looking at analytics, how long they were there, what they looked at, etc. And here's what they found. A lot of IP hits from Bridgetown, Barbados, and that would be where the last, quote, sighting, unquote, was Judy Maurer. That's where Judy Maurer supposedly saw Amy. On Thanksgiving Day, 15 hits with an average of 38 minutes of time on the site. Christmas Day, and I don't know, Mark, what wasn't clear to me is this 15 hits over the past 15 years on Thanksgiving
Right.
Day. You know what I mean? Or is it?
Yeah, I couldn't.
This,
I went back and looked at it again. I couldn't figure it out either.
right. So then Christmas Day, 16 hits, average time 48 minutes. Mom's birthday, 18 hits, 43 minutes. Who and why is someone from Bridgetown, Barbados, logging on to that? And my wife says, Mark, it's her. My wife is pretty confident that she's still out there and that it's her, and that's her way of kind of staying connected to the family on holidays, etc. What are your thoughts on the website and people logging in the website? I mean, that sounds like that's really a big assumption to make. But, according to the analytical guy, the telecommunications engineer says, hey, who would this be other than someone involved in the crime or the victim of the crime? And I don't think you can say that, because I'm sure they're doing public awareness things on certain days down there, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think on this last piece here of the data analytics and who's blogging onto the Amy Bradley's Missing website?
Well, I'll say this as your house skeptic here. I'll say this. I found this probably the most intriguing part of the entire story. I have to be honest with you. I really did. That's why I went back and looked at it. I want to get this straight here. It's just, I said over, was it one Christmas, one Thanksgiving, or multiple? What time frame? But I found it very intriguing. It's very, like, it gets under your skin. God, is she really reaching out to, does she really want to be connected? Is that her? Did she get off the ship? And so there's a part of me that wants to believe that maybe that's her, tapping those computer keys. I don't know. Nobody knows, but it is intriguing. I will say this: when my analytical part, takes over again, I have to juxtapose these two possible realities. One reality is, based on this, the computer hits, the IP hits, is, she wants to stay connected. She misses them. She loves them. She wants to see how they're doing, things like this. On the other hand, she would have almost certainly had to have voluntarily left that ship with someone.
Yep.
She voluntarily separated herself from this family that she loves so much and she longs for so much, that she's possibly giving herself away with this computer activity. And the last part of that is, especially today, Bill, especially today with technology. Now, again, it cuts both ways. Whatever technology you use to put yourself out there is also technology that can be used to locate you, of course. but there are a lot of ways to end this level of suffering of your parents, to let them know that you are alive and well, and that, hey, mom, dad, I'm watching you, I'm there, without giving yourself away necessarily. A lot of ways. And since that hasn't happened, I have to believe that these are people that are just terribly intrigued with they're looking at birth dates, they're looking at anniversaries, they're looking to see what their family's doing on Christmas, they're looking for photos of Amy online, because guess what? That's when a whole boatload of photographs are taken on holidays and birthdays and things like this. And so people who are very intrigued, it's a coincidence that they happen to be in the Caribbean. That's what my analytical side says is going on here.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, Mark. And I think you bring up a good point. Like at the end of this, to wrap it up, I kind of found, two potentials after watching this. The first is, in my mind at least, the first is she left the boat on her own accord to start a new life and to be separated from her family. She willingly did this to start over. Now, that's not something, of course, the family's going to vehemently disagree with that. But that's really, in my opinion, that's really the only way she gets off the ship. Or she went over the side. And I think as I kind of looked at those two situations and the amount of time that's passed, and what quote evidence there is of sightings out there, really not that many, Mark, for 3 or 4 or something from a high profile case, and no one has a picture other than the pictures that were found on a website. I am left with she went over the side. I'm left with she went over the side. Based on everything I saw here, I feel that's really the only reasonable explanation about what happened. It's an explanation that's based on the most evidence that there is, the most hard evidence that there is. Alistair Douglas, Yellow, nothing to do with it, in my opinion. Really, a lot of super strange things would have had to have happened. We already talked about that in order for him to have any involvement. Small room, things aren't going to happen unless anyone knows it. And it's very unlikely that someone's probably going to get out the door there without waking people up. So I don't really have a good explanation for those hits from the islands other than what you said. I like that. But I think, Mark, that she went over the side, and probably it was a choice that she made to do that. How about you? Where do you stand on it?
I couldn't put it better, Bill.
Yeah.
I really couldn't put it better, and
Yeah.
I agree with you in totality.
Yeah. So since this has come out, really, the other thing that we have to remember is, since this has come out, different day today than 98. At one point this was the number 1 or number 2 or 3 thing on Netflix. Millions of people have seen this. The story's out there. No new smoking guns, no new sightings, etc. Tell us what you think in the comments, please. What is your theory about what happened? If you think we're off base, let us know. And if there's a piece that we didn't talk about, throw it out there and we'll talk about it. Chief, this was a long conversation. Thanks for taking the time to have it with me. An interesting case. And let us know what you all think happened to Amy Bradley. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Bill. My pleasure.